All right, let's get started. Welcome everyone to this month's Boston Society of Architects Committee on the Environment meeting. We're looking forward to a great presentation by Paul Lucas and Harper Smith. But before we get started, we have a little bit of business to address for the Committee on the Environment. So after 3 years, Michael Grant, his term will end. My term as a co-chair of the Committee on the Environment will end. I've just been here this last year filling in for Alejandro Montaka. And so we have actually, I think, for the first time in BSA Committee on the Environment history, we have a choice for who can be the next set of co-chairs. And so we'll give each slate a chance just to make an elevator pitch. And a more detailed, more lengthy summary of their vision for the Committee on the Environment will be posted on the BSA Committee on the Environment's website, hopefully later during this session, if not by tomorrow. If it gets posted during this, I'll make sure to put a link in the chat for you all to see. The election will occur next month. So the meeting that's going to occur a month, I think it's June 19th at 6 p.m., will be primarily the election for the new co-chairs and chance to provide feedback. We'll give each slate a longer chance to give a presentation to make their pitch prior to that vote. So with that, I will turn it over to our two slates to make their elevator pitch. Just going because they're first on my screen. Laura and Beth, would you like to start?
Sure, thank you. Thanks, Patrick. Well, thank you all for giving us a few minutes here. And Beth and I just want to talk with you a little bit about our vision for COTE in the coming years. But first, to introduce myself, I'm Laura Fott. I'm a sustainability strategist associate with Feingold Alexander Architects. I have a few decades, I'm not going to say a few more than that, of experience with architecture, being a project manager in architecture, and I've had experience working in the sustainability side in a few firms here in Boston.
Hi everyone, I'm Beth Piercy. I'm the slate co-chair with Laura, and I'm an architect at Amenta Emma and a member of their sustainability team. And I also serve as a member of the sustainability team at Commercial Real Estate Women here at the Boston chapter.
So I'll walk you very quickly through our platform. Beth and I have spent a lot of time thinking about this, and we've kind of come up with a threefold points. The first being inclusivity and outreach, building on the platform that has come before us, that has been so strong. Just that toolbox, implementation toolbox for all firms, knowing that depending on your size and your employee status, your group or your project type, you really may or may not be able to pull from the resources within your office, but you can pull from the BSA. We all know that that's what this great community is about. And so really allowing that group to speak with each other and learn from each other and hear voices that we may not always hear from the intern level to the principal level, and making sure that we're pulling from all groups. We often find ourselves collaborating with different committees or different groups. Many of us here are parts of different different groups throughout Boston, your green schools, built environment plus, all of those things. But how do we get those voices that we don't always hear right now in the room with us? How do we pull them in further? And so that's a piece that we really want to work on. Also, legislation and code. There's, I think anyone working in the built environment here in Massachusetts has heard and seen about the climate bill that's gone through, the net zero building code, or even you may be part, like myself, with some of the electrification movements from your municipalities. So, how does that affect the landscape that we work on, the building code or the zonings that we deal with? And so talking that through, bringing that to the platform of COTE so that we all learn and can take that further, how it helps us. And then the last is more of a kind of overarching framework. It's well-being through sustainability. So, we've all sat in that meeting where everyone's talking about sustainability as if it's a dollar sign or not a negative, but something that they have to apply to a project. So refocusing that mindset and talking about it, the well-being, the positive effect that it has to the inhabitants, the occupants as they're going forward, and kind of reframing and refocusing the way we speak about it, just an overall piece that how learning how we best do that, and having that as, again, part of our practical toolkit. And one piece that we really haven't talked about, and I think that Jefferson and Kate will definitely talk about this too, is that we as a group in our past conversations have been talking to creating, bringing the committee back to the Committee on the Environment, so that we are looking at having a more committee led by co-chairs, whether that be, having it be about a year of a co-chair partnership and then pulling from within that diverse voice committee group and having elevating them, those folks to a co-chair within the committee, so move forward. So Beth can give a little more.
I just wanted to quickly add, like Laura said, or like Patrick said, we really elaborated on this in a document that will be posted on the BSA website, and we really worked hard to elaborate on those 3 points that Laura touched briefly on, and then kind of bullet them with action items that we believe will help us reach those goals. And I also just wanted to say that Laura and I have worked together on sustainability initiatives in the past, and I think we understand the framework for this type of partnership, and we're really passionate about this vision, and we're passionate about COTE and excited to implement it. So thank you for listening to us and taking the time, and we're just both excited to be part of this group regardless of what happens.
And as Laura mentioned, I think this is something that's common since we're fortunate enough to have multiple slates of candidates and other people who have expressed interest but maybe not fully coming up for co-chair. We are looking to establish a committee for the Committee on the Environment, and we have a number of people who've already expressed interest in that. If you are interested in serving on a committee, certainly let me know, and we can loop you into those conversations. With that, I will hand it off to our other slate of candidates, Kate Bobritsky and Jefferson Poole. Take it away.
Great, thanks, Patrick. Everyone can hear me? Okay. I'm Kate Bobritsky. I'm the Director of Sustainability and Building Performance at Arrow Street. I have spent the better part of 2+ decades working in the Boston area, specifically on sustainability, building performance within my firm, as also in the greater community with many organizations, really focusing on advocacy and passing several legislations in that time frame. And one thing that I'm really passionate about is always sharing my knowledge, my expertise. I've been a member of the COTE committee for about 10 years, and some of you may have remembered before that there was the Committee for the Advancement of Sustainability at the BSA, and was active in that group before it was no longer. I've been active both in the BSA on the membership committee as an elected position, and that position of my 3-year term is ending this year. And really looking forward and excited about joining the COTE committee and being chair along with my partner, Jefferson. I'll give him a second to introduce himself.
Thanks, Kate. And it's great to see so many familiar faces here and some new faces. I think we're excited to really breathe some energy into this, to hear from all those voices. I think we share that mission, Laura, that you had mentioned of elevating all of the voices within this community, and certainly to help build on the strengths of the committee as a whole. My name is Jefferson Poole. I'm an associate principal at Goody Clancy. My role there is a lead designer, and but at the same time, I have a focus on sustainable design. I'm co-chair of our in-house 2030 committee. And you know, what gets me excited every day is really the opportunity to make distinctive, memorable, beautiful spaces that resonate and that elevate the spirit. And that extends beyond maybe the traditional definition of architecture, but really connecting to the site and to the ecology and finding ways that we can create this this balance between the built and the natural environments.
Jefferson and I have been working together for many years now, both nationally and locally on the Sustainable Design Leaders Group. And we feel that our passions and our different perspectives on sustainable design really form a good partnership, kind of bringing together both the aesthetic and technical and the very holistic approach that you need when you're thinking about sustainable design. And so when we started thinking about sort of our vision for COTE, we really looked at two things, you know, kind of what's happening out there, both locally and nationally around sustainable design. And I think it's a very exciting time, both with the new vision from the BSA of looking at advancing architecture, equity, and the environment. And also last year, the AIA adopting the COTE Top 10 framework as the framework for design excellence. There's a, you know, both local and national recognition that sustainability and sustainable design is good design. And so I think that that's why our partnership really will focus on that particular piece and using the top 10 framework, the framework for design excellence. I'm still not used to saying it that way. Use that as a sort of guiding principle for programming for our tenure as co-chairs. And so that would be looking at the different aspects, everything from equity, wellness, resilience, energy, et cetera, and using that as a way to talk about how different components of those measures need to work together in synergies, and bringing in experts for programming that can really talk to those things both from within the more traditional AAC industry, but also outside, all of the different components that we now really are thinking about when we're doing our projects. And so that's kind of how we would think about using the framework for programming.
Patrick, you had requested that we put together our elevator speech. I think all four of us, you can tell, are passionate. We have a very long elevator, so we're taking this group all the way to the top of maybe the Empire State Building here. Just ever so briefly, I think when I think about our partnership, it's about dissolving boundaries and picking up the thread that Michael and Patrick, yourself, and Alejandra had set down about dissolving boundaries between architects and engineers. Kate and I approach this and look at this through different lenses that I think have so much overlap, and there's such richness at those intersection points. And the more that we can continue to break down those boundaries between design and high performance and sustainability, and see how we can build upon those intersection points, I think that's what we really hope to do with this. So thanks again for listening to us, and look forward to continued conversations with all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I want to thank all four of our candidates for the co-chair role. Again, we will hold the election on our next meeting, which I believe is on Wednesday, June 19th at 6 p.m.
16.
We'll be on the lookout for that on the BSA's website and events. And I would be remiss not to give credit to the people at BSA, especially Susan Green, who do so much work behind the scenes to facilitate these events. And in the last 15 minutes, put on the BSA's website the detailed slate candidacies for each slate here, and I put that in the chat. So follow that link. You can read more about each slate, and we hope to see all of you and the larger COTE community next month. So with that, thank you for your patience, Luke or Paul and Harper. I want to introduce you and let you get started on your presentation. So while you're working on that technical issue, let me introduce Paul Lucas and Harper Smith. Paul is a fellow AIA and will be sharing sustainable design lessons from over 15 years of experience in Boston and in China. He'll share about small, medium, and large-sized projects that integrate sustainability as a design's point of departure, similar to, I think, what our two slates are envisioning, the role of sustainability in architecture in the future, recognizing its potential to inspire new kinds of architectural expression and utility. with that, please join me in welcoming Paul and Harper. Thank you.
Great. Good. Well, thank you, Patrick, and Michael and Susan. And thanks to everybody for being here. And I think I need to switch my screen. Good.
Great.
So can everybody see that?
Yep.
All right. And can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. So thanks again for this kind invitation to speak to COTE. It's great to hear the platforms, and hopefully there'll be a very smooth transition, as I'm sure there will be. So I think you guys are doing great work. So this opportunity to speak to you came just after we launched our new website, which we've been working hard on over the pandemic. Putting the website together was an opportunity to reflect on the over 30 sustainable projects that we had designed over the last 15 years. So what I'd like to do today is speak to you about 4 of the projects. 2 are in China and 2 are in the Boston area. The first project is called the Jindu Sustainable Pavilion. The developer is the Jindu Development Company based out of Hangzhou, China. The building is part showroom, part meeting place, gym, a recreational conference space. More importantly, the developer wanted to create a 50,000 square foot demonstration sustainable building as part of a 1,000-unit housing complex. The developer wanted to share their keen interest in sustainable design with their audience. The first 2 projects that we did were the first projects that were with Brooks Mostu and Zhu Zhan under the moniker of the China Vision Project. Brooks is an old friend. He's also the founder of the Davis Square Architects company. And I got to know Zhu, shown here on the far right, through her husband, Jian Zhang, who worked at our office one summer. And then we also have here Harada-san, a local Japanese landscape architect, and Kathy, who is Jue's sister, and she was at least had always 2 or 3 cell phones with her, many times operating at least 2 of them at one time. Before starting our design, the client and our academic friends generously offered to provide us with tours of local communities around Hangzhou. And one of my favorite sites that we were able to see was actually in Anhui province, and it's a town called Hongsun. Hongsun was named a UNESCO heritage site in the year 2000. It's a great example of vernacular sustainable practices which are carried out in the design of these beautiful villages. And here you can see the approach to the town over a bridge spanning a small lake. The town is to the north of the lake, and the mountains, or shan, are to the north of the town, such that the northern winds are protected by the mountains. So the mountains to the north shed water to the south. So rivers, streams, and canals weave through the densely packed village and supply the city with all its water needs. The water is then finally filtered by tall grasses and plantings in the lake to the south of the town. As you will see, there is a beautifully calibrated balance between building, open space, and the landscape. Public space is often filled with water, as you can see in this image on the right. While heavily touristed, the town shows how sustainability and beauty can take on a new dimension and define a culture and a place. Here's an example of how flowing water is used throughout the town. Noteworthy are the simple, elegant slabs of local stone that become bridges crossing the waterways as the waterways cut through the city or the town. Besides defining a private entrance to the house, the black stone also serves a utilitarian purpose. The bridges and seats are used to dry vegetables, even laundry, and they're especially effective on hot sunny days because the stone is black and absorbing the heat. Many of the courtyard houses have their own courtyard pools where they can raise fish. In fact, many of these houses are built on round stones so that the water can filter underneath the house from house to house and courtyard to courtyard. All of these examples and so many other places like Hong Kong fed our imagination and provided us with a cultural appreciation of what our client wanted to achieve. And that is to design a model for sustainable and healthy living. That was a tall order indeed. So our site is located in Hangzhou, China. Hangzhou is a medium-sized city in China with about 10 million people in its metropolitan area. Its central area is about 4 to 6 million, and you'll get different numbers on that. It's very famous for its exquisite Xihu, or West Lake. You may also know it as being the center of Alibaba. Now, our site is located 2 miles north of the lake. Now, the actual site was part of a larger university campus, which was being demolished as we were there, in fact, visiting there one day. And as you can see, there's no concern here about OSHA regulations. We came out of the site with dust on our suit jackets from the explosions and the dust. But you can also see how the roof tiles and floor tiles are neatly stacked right after the demolition happens. And these are then used for recycling purposes. As you'll see, we were also contemplating and proposing to use some of these tiles and slates as part of our proposed design and the elevation. But one of the first things our clients asked us to do was prepare a research document on sustainable concepts and technologies. So when we returned from our first trip to the site, we spent 6 weeks developing a 300-page binder with lots of references related to precedents and resources. They were particularly interested in different kinds of products and new technologies, which might be showcased in this building. We then returned to China, where we met with Jindu's team and shared with them the results of our research over the course of 4 days. And here we are with Brooks and Jue. It was kind of a compressed seminar that provided the developer with lots of information about possible design strategies. They gave us immediate feedback about things that they wanted to include, creating in the process what effectively could be considered a basis of design document. It also helped establish this very strong bonded relationship with our clients. From there, we took an immediate deep dive into developing 3 schematic design proposals. And one of them was called the Spine and included a subterranean pool. Now, these drawings are done by Ben Graham, as one who very talented designer who was working with us at the time and who is now residing in Oregon. The clients loved the facade studies, which are almost Altoesque in their rhythm and delineation. But the clients also wanted something that was a little less grotto-like as it related to the pool. This led to this sketch, which thought of the pool as being more like a vessel, such that the pool and the water are celebrated and elevated to a higher level. This is inspired in part by the extraordinary elegant vessels that I saw when I was taking a side trip to Xi'an and saw the museum there where they were exhibiting these kinds of vessels, some of them 5,000 years old. And typically they would consist of very simple bowl-like or vessel forms supported by 3, 4, or 5 legs, all of which were in different profiles and proportions. So back in Hangzhou, one evening, Brooks and I were working on sketches that pretty much defined the concept in the diagram. Mind you, we were doing this in the middle of their New Year celebration. So we were in a high rise and fireworks were going off all around us, such that one would have thought we were in downtown Beirut. Here are some of the sketches that describe some of our ideas, including elevating the pool and containing the vessel of the water and all the uses within a strictly defined perimeter and volume dictated by the developer in the city. And this is a pivotal sketch that was done in Hangzhou in that hotel, and it shows a longitudinal section of the pool contained within the volume of the building, allowed by zoning and site parameters. And it's designed also to capture more space by using some of the subterranean levels for mechanical rooms and other support spaces. Back in Boston, then we refined the design and the diagram. And most of this work was done in physical model and in Rhino. So this is a translation of that diagram into a section and demonstrating some of the sustainable principles, especially as it relates to ventilation. There was also this kind of crazy idea for how we might heat the pool by utilizing excess energy generated by a factory down the road. We had seen this strategy used in other parts of China, where sometimes insulated pipes are used to transfer heat from a plant or from one building to another across the landscape. Now, the west wall used a heavily vegetated wall of hanging plants, which is also used to help capture water. And these hanging gardens also help shade the west interior spaces while filtering beautiful light into the pavilion space proper. Here you can see an exploded diagram showing the key components of the design. And I want you to take special notice of the running track that follows the perimeter of the interior of the space, and it's located just underneath the pool. So that as one is running along the track, you get different vistas of all the uses on the inside of the building, as well as being able to see the entry court, which we'll be talking about later. This is an idea actually developed by an intern who had been visiting us from Wellesley one summer. And here are more developed drawings of the lateral and longitudinal sections on the left. And also shown here is the east elevation, which looks out over the entry court. And so obviously we had to deal with shading and try to control light as much as we could, given the positioning of the building and its openings. So please note that we took these drawings only to design development level. And this is common in China, because what happens at that point, then the drawings are turned over to what's called a local design institute. These are large corporations with hundreds of architects, sometimes thousands of architects, that then turn your drawings into local construction drawings. So I'm not going to show you all 6 floors, but here are 2 of those. And on the left is the main floor, which shows this entry bridge. So we have this idea of a bridge going from the outer plaza over a chasm of the landscape and onto the main exhibition floor. And this was referred to then as the bridge to the future. The plan on the right it shows the 2 floors up and shows the gym spaces overlooking the gardens and other recreational spaces. It was great to be able to come back to Hangzhou during the process and to see the model of the pavilion and the project site. And on your left, you can see the entry court designed by C2 Landscape, who were in Boston at the time and now in Fort Collins, Colorado. And they did the entry design and the court and landscape work. These images also give you a sense of the context of the housing towers and other buildings. In fact, this was the first time we got to see the design of the adjacent buildings, which would include a school, a kindergarten, a shopping center, and offices. The taller structures there are about half of the towers, and the towers are about twice as high as what you can see in the screen. And here you get a better view of the western facade, where the trays are for the hanging gardens. Now, this is a rendering by Alex Hograve, who was taken on the southeast corner as one enters into the entry court. And on your right is an entry vestibule, referred to as the bridge to the future, as I mentioned. And as you can also see, the gym spaces on the 2nd floor. And then the pool is again supported by these 2 large piers or arms that raise the vessel. Now, these drawings also share with you our working process, which includes working over 3D model images, as well as working in 3D models, and doing so in an iterative fashion. Sometimes, like the drawing on the left, is a pencil drawing that was executed by 2 or 3 people, overlaying other drawings one upon the other, and sometimes yielding interesting and accidental results. Now, these drawings are of the pool, and imagine, if you will, doing a backstroke at night, looking up through the skylights at the sky and seeing the stars. The hand drawing on the left was done in part by Ben Graham, And the model rendering was done by Kazhou Chen and Alex Hograve again, both of who were working with us at the time. So we had also a chance to see the project during construction. Here I am with Chris Sarek, member of our team, and it was a very hot summer day, some 95 degrees. Yet we found ourselves to be very comfortably cool thanks to the natural ventilation. So we could really see that the air was moving through the spaces and cooling us as we had hoped for it would. The formwork had just been taken off on the underside of the belly of the vessel, as you can see. It was about to be cleaned. And unfortunately, that was the last time we saw that project because what happened was the property changed hands in management control. And consequently, the full ambitions of the original CEO were not carried out, much to our disappointment. However, the project is now being used as a gym and spa, and it still plays an important role in this complex. And as always, we're very grateful to all the people that contribute and help in this these projects. They're all very much a collaborative effort. So big thanks to my partners on this, Ju Zahn and Brooks Mostu, and our design team, and many of those that I haven't mentioned, as well as our consultants. Now, the next project is also in China and for the same client. So when we finished that project, they asked us to take a look at this other one, and it was in a different city on a site that had yet to be created. And the purpose of this project was to develop a master plan for a reclaimed site in the Bay of Xiamen in Fujian province. But it's also an opportunity to explore architectural ideas, in particular as they relate to sustainable strategies. The project was to include somewhere between 11 and 12 towers, and the program is for housing, hotels, and other mixed uses. Now, Xiamen is a remarkable island city in southern China. It's a historic city of some 4 million people and was supposed to have been visited by Marco Polo. The larger bay of Xiamen is populated with a number of other islands. As the islands in the city run out of space to grow, land is being reclaimed along the edges of the bay. Our site is just north of the city island on this reclaimed or to be reclaimed land that we will see. Now, the province of Fujian is also famous for the Hakka people and their impressive tulu structures. Now, these square and circular structures house families and livestock and represent a unique communal form. So this is just outside of Xiamen, more in the mountains to the west. This form and the appeal of celebrating community was a strong influence on our design. Legend has it that during the early years of the Cold War, the CIA mistook the Tulus for missile silos when they were scanning their first satellite photographs. They were probably very surprised to learn that the center of these silos were just populated by pigs and livestock. We were also impressed by the beautiful rock formations found in the island's lush park, and these were evident in many parts of the island area where you would see these kinds of rock outcroppings. The chiseled rock formations also was a source of inspiration for our team and informed the formal language, as you'll see. So we also enjoyed spending time exploring this very special island called Shulang Yu in Shamans Bay. So it's right across from the main city, the main island city. The island served as an international treaty port run by the British from 1842 to 1902. Its architecture is a unique blend of local and European influences, responding to a very hot and humid climate. Imagine something like Savannah, Georgia in the summer. So these are two examples of the buildings, types of buildings that one would find on this island. And this one is wrapped generously by porches that are typical of the island's architecture. The in-between space offered by the porch helps temper the impact of the hot and humid climate on the residents. In addition, the island's lush vegetation provides lots of shade while catching cool ocean breezes. And this stuff really works. So when you're walking through this island, you'll feel the cool breezes as you are in different parts of the pathway or streets or under the cover of the porches. So we try to incorporate this idea in our design of the tower's building envelope. A porch-like screen made of solar panels helps to shade residents' gardens and balconies. In addition, the balconies have integrated operable vents in its floors, and this allows air to move up the entire facade, an air that is then cooled and filtered by the vegetated balconies. The living spaces have another layer of operable shading devices to control light and heat. We also explored the ideas of integrating wind turbines in the outer corners of the building and looked at optimal profiles for where they might be located relative to the form of the towers. We also explored ways of sculpting the floor plates and using the thin profiles for cooling the building itself, much like a hot engine block on a motorcycle, which is air cooled. And because of the way the fins are designed, it helps them heat the mass of the engine block itself. Oops. So ideas about generating natural ventilation became a major driver in this design. And these diagrams, the lower right one in particular, shows how a tubular system of spaces and ventilation corridors could direct cooling from the base of the building throughout the tower. This section of the tower base, the buildings, and the sea illustrates how cooling can be promoted. Sea breezes from the ocean are captured and further cooled under the shaded spaces of the lower 2- and 3-story base buildings. And then what happens is they move up and rise up through the tower in their envelopes and help cool the interior spaces. These two sections illustrate how this concept was further developed through the design development stages, which again is as far as we took this project. So this is kind of a unique project because while it was a master plan, it still had this kind of strong architectural component to it. We also wanted to develop profiles for towers that worked well in capturing sun and light while optimizing the building volume. These profiles were developed by Masoud Akbarzadeh, who is now teaching at UPenn. He also studied forms that could be integrate turbines, either centrally located within the volume of the tower or on the perimeter where there is higher airflow movement. These individual tower types then were deployed on site models, in the bottom of which is closest to the final design. And this model shot illustrates how several of the design concepts came to fruition, and they include 2 hotel towers, whose forms again are inspired by the rock formations, the base building that took on the structural form of the Tulu structures, and the layered porch concept, which was designed to encourage natural ventilation. And here you can see the Tulu-inspired courtyards of the base and of the towers in this drawing by Ji Zhao. Below is an elevation of the 10 residential towers and the 2 hotel towers. And here we have a close-up of the 2 hotel towers clad in that porch-like skin, again showing that chiseled look to the volume of the buildings. And the final master plan is shown on the right, and the street pattern was predetermined by the local government and planning office. And it's typical of the kind of favored morphed grid patterns that one so commonly sees in so many Chinese cities. In the final plan, what happens then has to be tested in a special software package that the government has. And what it has to do is make sure that each of the living spaces receives at least 2 hours of natural daylight throughout all the seasons. The good news was that we are designed past this standard. And it's not an easy thing to do because, again, the developers and clients are pushing very hard to maximize building volume. And there's lots of restrictions on where you can put the buildings and setbacks, etc. We'll finish this project discussion up with a couple of images and renderings. And this one is a drone view of 2 residential towers and a view of the Tulu space below. Note the screened in porches, and on the left, you can see on the right, actually, the wind turbines that are anchored to the outer edge of the building. And the ground floor views of the Tulu courtyard on the left and on the right, a hotel tower that is captured in this particular rendering. As always, again, we want to thank the many talented collaborators who worked on this project. We had a very talented team indeed. And some of these things are designed and executed in very fast times, very fast time periods. And typically clients, even if you do it in a 2 or 3 or 6 month period, which would be fast for any kind of project, they still are wondering what's taking so long. So this third project is closer to home and is on Columbia Point, in fact. And this offered us an opportunity to work on projects of the scale we did in China while incorporating lessons learned from past projects. In 2015 and 16, there was an international competition called Living with Water, which was announced and sponsored by the BSA, the then BRA, and the USGBC. Of course, we couldn't resist the opportunity to participate. Now, more globally speaking, this competition was calling for designers to address the pressing challenges that rising sea levels and climate change was causing. In the not so distant rear view mirror view of history at that time was the memory of Hurricane Katrina and Hurricane Sandy, both of which had caused billions of dollars of damage and environmental, societal, and economic havoc. The competition used 3 local sites in Boston as a way of testing ideas to combat rising tides. And this is becoming increasingly obvious in Boston, especially in places like Long Wharf, where during king tide days, you can see water actually lapping over onto the surface of Long Wharf itself. One could argue that Boston has been living with water since its inception. The symbiotic relationship between water access and habitable land has been an operative driver of design for centuries. But that relationship is increasingly threatened by climate change. Now, these well-known evolutionary cartographies featuring in Mapping Boston tell the story of Boston's topographic transformation. And when laid side by side with projected flooding patterns circa 2050, we can also see a strong correlation between those areas where there was fill and where there's areas prone to be flooded in the future. Now, the site we selected to study was Columbia Point, and shown here is a map of the areas vulnerable to flooding during mean tide. Now, this map shows areas that could be flooded during a storm surge at high tide. Anyone who's driven on Morrissey Boulevard during a major rain event is familiar with a more modest version of this kind of flooding pattern. Now, if you fast forward 100 years, the entire peninsula is in danger of being flooded during a storm surge. And you can imagine all the variations between 100 years and the present, and especially as the story gets worse with years to come, unless we do something about it. So given the inevitability of this foreboding danger, we thought to pursue 4 sets of goals. Now, these included, first, to protect the community by managing the water. Second, to harness renewable energy where possible. Third, to create public spaces. And fourth, to integrate infrastructure, urbanism, landscape, and the renewable energy. While we do not have time to delve into as deeply into this project, there was like a 250-page document that described all of its different attributes and design ideas. I do want to focus on a key concept that was developed, and that was to cut a canal through the site, which we call the Hydroelectric Canal. This allows having infrastructure play a dual role, that is to protect habitable land while generating renewable energy. Now, this idea is not a new one and has been borrowed from a local source. Some 300 years ago, Mill Creek was connected to Mill Pond, a tidal basin, which then was connected with Boston Harbor. The mills along Mill Creek were powered by the changing tidal levels between Mill Pond and the harbor. Now, our proposal is to cut a canal through the site running parallel to the Morrissey Boulevard, much like Mill Creek did, but much larger. Now, I'm going to jump ahead in the design and show you the final plan. On the left, you can see the existing urban fabric, and on the right, the proposed design. Using an urban fabric similar to the grain that is found in places like the South End or Back Bay, a new block structure is extended across Columbia Point while being anchored to the new canal. Given the relatively shallow harbor depth, we investigated available turbine technologies, including this VLH turbine, which stands for very low head. And it's suitable for depths averaging about 3 meters, which is exactly what the conditions are in that part of the harbor. We discovered and found a French company called MJ2 that fit the bill and had a technology that would be perfectly applicable to the site. Now this slide shows how the turbine can be anchored to concrete barrages or supports at both ends of the canal. And then we asked Arab's office in New York to make sure that there was enough velocity that could be generated in the canal so that the turbine would actually operate and be active. And they did a CFD, sort of computational fluid dynamic analysis, and determined that in fact there was enough velocity for the water, about 0.45 knots, and that it would be able to generate power for this particular turbine. And there were 4 sets of these turbines, and this diagram shows how the canal functions and the location of the turbines at either end of the canal. It also illustrates how the canal and its adjacent lands has the capacity to store excess water from high tides or higher tides and even storm surges if such an event were to happen. Now one can calculate the potential energy generated by the canal based on the volume of the water and its velocity. And we did a number of these calculations and it looked promising. But this scheme does not only rely exclusively on hydropower, but also it's powered by solar. And so such that each of the blocks, the housing blocks, would include solar energy. In addition, geothermal would be applied where possible. And wind is less likely due to the proximity of the airport and air traffic patterns. But some of the strategies used to make this area more resilient are based on using the full range of building and landscape typologies. And we'll show you 2 of those. A key typology is based on creating a modular urban block, or what we call the building quad typology. Each block would be self-sustaining and resilient, such that the block was net zero energy while managing water and flooding conditions. For instance, in the event of a storm event, each of the quad's courtyards could be flooded to capture and contain stormwater. The idea is that we can build more resilient neighborhoods if we build resiliency into each block and into each building. And this can affect then how we think about the development process. The size, orientation, and final design of each block would be built by different sets of developers and designers, generating the kind of richness and variety that we find in places like the South End and Back Bay today, which in fact use a very similar process. Another typology is the landform typology. These typologies are part building, part landform, but help to add resiliency to the outer edges of Columbia Point. It's also possible to offer great resilience and opportunities for UMass to grow by using floating architecture, which can be docked and tethered to the landform typologies. Like a metabolist dream, the harbor can be filled with floating classrooms, offices, and other academic uses. The result of deploying these typologies and other features that we have not discussed is what we hope looks like a transformed neighborhood, one that looks like it's very much part of Boston's evolving texture and identity. Now, this short animation highlights some of the design strategies that we shared with you today. And here we can see the hydroelectric canal. And on the left of the canal, you can see these areas where land or water can be contained if necessary. And then you can see now the transition to these landform typologies as we bend the corner around the John F. Kennedy Library and turn towards a transformed, more resilient UMass campus and a transformed landscape that can help buffer and manage rising tides more effectively. And finally, we see some of the floating architecture, again, anchored and tethered to these landforms. In this particular view, the hydroelectric canal shows how parks on the west side of the canal can collect the excess water during a major event. And at the far end of the canal, we can see where there's the four VLH turbines. And this animation illustrates the landform typologies and the floating architecture that is anchored to it, as well as the gateway to the canal, which we'll see shortly. So this is an opportunity to celebrate infrastructure and integrate it with the development process. And this last vignette here shows the north end of the canal. It shows how the parklands and a network of walkways and bike paths and spaces can be connected to already a pre-existing network in South Boston and neighboring communities. Best of all, this map illustrates how most of Columbia Point can stay dry in 100 years if we use some of these strategies, but not without considerable forethought, investment of design and other resources. But we think that this can be done incrementally in a way that offers a viable model for building and city building. And again, many thanks to all the people who contributed and helped on this project. And this also included a lot of conversations with people in the hydro technology area. And it was amazing how willing and interested people were to contribute their expertise and their ideas to this project. Now, this last project is far more modest in scale, but it's meant to be prototypical and provides a scalable model for net zero energy living. At the end of this presentation, I'll also be showing you a short 5-minute video about the house that we did as part of the Boston Magazine feature on 3 houses of the future. And this came out, I guess, back in February, March. While the video provides an overview of the project, I thought we can take these next 5 minutes to talk about some of the more technical aspects of the house and introduce you to it. The house was completed for a recently retired couple, both of whom are academics. And the program is very compact and along the lines of Sarah Sasanka's not so big house thinking, with a living area of just around 2,000 square feet. Oh. Now, the project, like most of our projects, evolves 3-dimensionally from inception throughout design. And it's located in Harvard, Mass, on a 2.5-acre site, a beautiful site. And the house had to manage some very challenging site constraints and conditions. And these included dealing with challenging step-back requirements and providing suitable access to the one place that there was a buildable part to the site, given the amount of ledge that existed on site. And then the location of the house also had to be carefully balanced with the water sources and the location of the septic system. So you can see how we got squeezed here. So working with Derek Brain of Soulworks, we were able to locate the best place on the site to locate the house based on solar exposure and using a solar Pathfinder. So we go around the site with this Pathfinder and confirm our assumptions about what we thought would be the best location for the house. This also had to be taken into account as it relates to elevation and how shadows cast by trees could impact the performance of the building. And in the end, we located the house on one of the higher points of the site. The design of the roof and the panels became a major driver for the design of the house. This has also had to be balanced with the design of the interior space and the volume, that is, getting the house and its volume to be the right size. Of course, roof hangs also played an important part in providing summer shade and what became a very distinctive roof line. As you can see from this plan, it is indeed a very compact plan, yet it feels spacious because it borrows space and views from adjacent spaces in the landscape. We tried to develop a really tight building envelope. On all the walls are 12 inches thick. They have an R value of 35 and the roof has an R value of 50. And of course, the crawl space is also insulated. We also use triple glazed Pella windows, which I think offer a great value for their performance. And of course, thinking about window location is paramount in making sure we minimize the amount of windows on the north side of the house while opening up views to the south. I have to confess, we did use some steel and justified it by saving building height and cost there in the process. The truth is that we really like the look of the steel in this project. Now, the general contractor, George and Keith Donahue, brought a wonderful sense of craft to the making of this house throughout the process. And they were richly rewarded. Every Wednesday when we had a site meeting, the client would bring giant boxes of pizza for the entire crew. And they were very appreciative of that indeed. Now, SolWorks did all the design work for the solar panels, and we used 56 panels by LG, producing about 305 watts. And we used 2 batteries that were manufactured by a company called Sonnen, which means sun or sunning, and they're a German solar company, and they produce a beautiful product. Matt Bean of Norian Ciani was our engineer, and he designed the MEP systems. And we only needed 3 mini splits to condition the entire house. And of course, there was an ERV tucked away. And we also had supplementary heat if needed. It was more of a decorative feature, and it was only used once or twice a year in the most extreme sort of -15 temperatures. And there's also a fan by the company Badass, as in the donkey. Now, the house also supports the owner's mobility needs. The owner bought a Chevy Bolt, an electric vehicle, and the car drives just under 10,000 miles a year and uses about 3,500 kilowatts per year. So the house is designed such that the sun powers not only the house, but also the car. So when you're driving the car down the street, you're driving off the power of the sun. And now, let's see, just click this right. All right. So now the house has a HERS rating, home energy rating of -23. So the standard home has about 100. Existing homes typically have around 130, and we came in at -23, which makes it basically net positive. If you're at 0, then you're at net 0. And so the clients, of course, all of this was modeled by our engineers and solar designers and our team, but the clients monitored the actual energy usage over the course of a year, their first year in the house. And the results confirmed that the house, in fact, generated as much energy as a house and car required. The second year performance was equally good. It was in line with the first year's. And by the way, we are finalizing kind of a paper, a more technical paper that describes the house and its performance over the last 2 years. And it should be ready on our website in about a month or two. And if people are interested, they can access it at that time. And again, I wanted to thank everyone who worked on this house, the Jensen DeLue house, also referred to the Rivendell house by the clients. And what I'd like to do now is finish up by showing you a video of the Boston Home Magazine's 3 Houses of the Future. All right. Let's see if this works. Welcome to Polga's Architecture Studio. We're absolutely thrilled to be part of Boston Magazine's feature on Homes of the Future. We think that sustainable design is at a tipping point right now. With recent developments and improvements in renewable energy technologies, a better understanding of passive house principles and best practices, along with the drop in price points on a lot of these ideas and technologies, we're in a position where it's no longer a question of whether or not we should build buildings as a net zero building, but the question is, why not? Today I'd love to share with you a story of a unique project for a retired academic couple. Meet Pat DeLue, a former vice provost, and Richard Jensen, a math professor. They asked this very question, why not? They had a dream of building a more resilient net zero energy home that was the right size on a bucolic site in Harvard, Mass. Not only is the house net zero energy, that is, it has a HERS rating of -23, but there's enough renewable energy produced to power the electric car for 10,000 miles a year. The house also has 2 sets of batteries that help with managing energy intermittency. The combination of PV, batteries, and an electric vehicle is, in our opinion, a game changer. Allow me to explain how the energy delivery matrix works today and how it can change over time. The typical house today gets its energy from the grid and gets supplementary energy either from oil or gas. Now with solar systems or renewable energy systems, your home can rely less on the grid and secondary carbon-based fuels. Plus, your monthly bill is bound to get reduced. This system works even better if we introduce batteries. The batteries store excess energy and renewable energy for use during the evenings and on cloudy days. They also add a layer of resiliency to the house and the energy systems, especially during storms. Plus, the batteries look really cool. Look at the battery by Sonnen, a German company that we used. And finally, we can add an electric car to the energy delivery system, such that the energy from the panels and the battery can be distributed to the electric vehicle. Adding batteries and EVs can also help increase the grid's storage capacity. Now, the process for designing a house of this type is like designing a conventional home, with, however, greater involvement with your engineering team early on in the process. Construction processes used in the house focused on creating tight building envelope and making sure that as little energy was lost through the building envelope itself. This requires a great contractor, which we were lucky to have in Donahue and Sons. So what do you have to sacrifice in having a net zero energy house? If anything, we think net zero energy homes can create higher quality environments, as we hope to demonstrate in this abbreviated tour of the house. Now, the house is gently sited on a crest of a hill where the roof captures as much sun as possible. The old farm stone wall acts as a kind of threshold to the house and carport, which is located on the left. The entry to the house is marked by a lower entrance canopy and structure. The roof eaves are generously proportioned to provide summer shade on the south side of the house. The living and dining room have taller ceilings and south-facing views of the lush landscape. A wood stove is only used on sub-zero days. The kitchen and dining room anchor the floor plan in the adjacent spaces. The mechanical room with the inverters and batteries is located above the kitchen. The master bedroom is on the east side of the house, capturing the morning sun and overlooking stone walls and the towering pine trees. The carport provides shelter for the Chevy Bolt, an electric vehicle. It also serves as a kind of entry gateway, framing views of the landscape. So in the end, what we find most fulfilling and rewarding is to see that our clients are happy with the project and that it has performed as anticipated. This would not be possible without the generous help and support of this project from our clients, Pat DeLue and Richard Jensen, and of course all the help and effort that went into designing and building this from our engineers, our contractors, and our consultants. Thank you. Okay, that's it.
Great, thank you so much. That was inspiring, and I'd like to invite everyone to make sure that they fill out the form. I put in the chat. I forgot to mention it earlier. If you'd like continuing education credit, please see the last link in the chat. Also see that link about the slate for the two co-chair slates for their position statements. And with that, let's open it up for questions. Anyone is welcome to either come off of mute and ask questions directly, or to put a question in the chat, and I'm happy to moderate. I'll start things off with, one of the things that really resonated with me with your designs is reflecting nature and utilizing nature in your designs kind of throughout that philosophy. Could you speak more to kind of that big picture philosophy that you bring to your work with either mimicking or that inspiration of nature, how you, like, what your process looks like for coming up with these ideas?
Sure. Well, I think just over my whole career, I've always been interested in nature and landscape and gravitated toward architects who had similar kind of respect for nature, whether it was Frank Lloyd Wright or Oliver Alto or others like that. And then the other part that just part of our training at MIT and some of the people I studied with was really understanding the site, even camping out on the site, understanding everything about it. And the nature of some of these urban design projects is that site is redefined at a different scale. But that means that you can still find those jewels of inspiration, whether it's on that island in Shaman where you see the rock formations, or whether you're in a forest in a site in Harvard, Mass. So it's just being open to nature and trying to see it not as separate from the architecture, but part of it. And then that carries itself not only as a source of inspiration for ideas, not necessarily forms, but the ideas behind what generates nature in its conditions, but also how ultimately the design of what everyone's doing, whether it's urban or architectural, relates to nature in a very tangible way.
Thanks. Does anyone else have a question they'd like to ask Paul?
Yes, this is Franziska Amaker. I think this is fabulous work, very imaginative and interesting combination of different technologies. So I am wondering at what point you felt secure about your different strategies, like, for example, in your first project, that the technology actually was worthwhile and the numbers would work in comparison to just the whole approach.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Francisca, for your kind comments. Actually, the first project was the first time we'd really delved into that kind of deeper dive into the field. And we worked closely with engineers who were advising us and testing some of our assumptions about the design, but not nearly at the sophisticated level that is available today. But we did a lot of back and forth looking at wall sections, making sure all the spaces were properly cooled, and at the same time in the process, because again we were early into it, and that's why I think there was real value in doing that basis of design report, was that we had a multidisciplinary team. At the time I was teaching, and I invited a number of people from local universities to come in and help us over a 6-week period where we just did extensive documentation and research into what was the newest and latest. So it was a great opportunity to be able to share that with the client, and in the process also learn more through the eyes of other talented engineers and professionals.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, they're sort of unusual combinations, I think, of technologies.
Yeah, I mean, I guess part of it is also making just sure that the passive strategies are all in place and getting you the most mileage, so that you don't rely on the technologies as much as towards the tail end of the project. So in the residence, for instance, we got our HERS rating down to about 15 to 18 without any renewables. And so, renewables were just a bonus. And we could have pushed even harder had we used even other more passive techniques, but the client didn't want to go there.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you.
So just a quick question about that, the HERS rating. Why did you go with HERS rating over Passive House or any of the others? Was that client driven or?
Yeah, that was client driven. Plus there's a financial benefit and incentive. And I can't remember, but it's not a lot. I want to say it was like $2,500 or $3,500, which basically pays or barely pays for the fee for doing the test. But it's a good kind of quick overview of all the different performance standards or aspects of the building. We did consider LEED, but the client, they weren't interested in pursuing LEED for the sake of the certificate. They were more interested in the overall performance. They were definitely very keen on using as many renewables as possible. In fact, they were the ones that pushed using batteries and an electric car. So a lot of that came from the client. And to this day, what they do is they measure how the performance of the battery and the meter on the outside. They keep a log, because one of the clients is a math professor, and he keeps a log of how it's doing, and actually analyzing some of the discrepancies in the loss ratios on the battery, because you lose some energy as you're transferring energy from one system to the other. So it's fascinating. I learned something from our client every time we talk to him about how his house is doing.
We're all struck.
I'll hazard a question here, Paul. First of all, beautiful work, and what struck me is the remarkable breadth of scope and scale. And I'm wondering if you have an example, or if you could touch on how thinking about the problem at those different scales, whether it's a single family house all the way up to district planning, informs each other. As you're working through some of the challenges related to one, are there ways that you find that maybe nature optimizes at a particular scale, and can you learn from one jumping back and forth to the other?
Well, I think, very broadly stated, there's obviously certain factors that a small project and a large urban project both all have to contend with, whether it's dealing with the physics of design, right? We have to deal with all those aspects, especially as it relates to light. So that's a really great starting point. And so thinking about where volumes are located, where massing is located, how masses are carved out to let light into habitable spaces, how people can live in those spaces in a reciprocal fashion where there's a balance between the form that envelops and defines habitable space and its relationship to the outside and nature. So some of those things, it doesn't matter if you're doing a big lobby for a skyscraper, a hotel in Xiamen, or an entry vestibule in a smaller house. Some of those same principles are going to hold true. You enter the space, how do you experience it? What do you see outside? How do you see inside? How do you move through it? How does that support the social dynamics one might want to achieve, and so on? So many of those factors just jump from scale to scale. And what's, I think, fascinating is how sometimes smaller ideas or at the scale of, say, building or detail, and this is true of the Shaman project, where we looked at building envelope, skin systems, where that kind of more domestic scale item, or even, let's say, call it smaller building, room scale, can influence larger scale and have a real impact on that. And then being able to look at an example like the island off the historic island, the British island off of the main island of Xiamen, the city island, is amazing, because there you can actually see in real time, in real life, how it works. And so it's a reassertion that there's these principles, there's these ideas that exist in history and precedents around the world, and especially indigenous cultures who they've been building sustainable things by definition for millennium. So looking to those things, looking to nature, all help across the board, I think.
Well, I have a quick question. I was wondering if you found, working in different countries, how people's impressions of sustainability changes between countries, or if it does at all?
I think that's a really good question, because for instance, in China, early on, we were very lucky to work with a developer who was genuinely motivated to do something as related to sustainability. But he's also a very good business person. He recognized the opportunity to be ahead of the curve and putting product on the market that had great potential for marketing the project. So there's that part of it. So each country is different, of course, depending on the methods of production of architecture and city making. But it's also very much defined by the culture of a place. So I was very lucky to do a couple of tours with some energy ministry groups in Switzerland and in Germany, and saw some projects there where it's some of the baseline conditions of how to build are just intrinsically understood by everybody, whether it's the residents or the designers or the city officials, that sustainability is key. And part of that has to do with cultural trajectories, where the Green Party was active in some of these countries back in the late 60s, early 70s. But there's also just a recognition of the value of resources and how to use those resources in a sensible way, which saves money and also saves the environment. So it's fascinating to see that. But what's happening now is that we're all in this together. Increasingly, people are realizing the interconnectivity of decisions made in one country and how it might impact another neighboring country. Or maybe we need more of that even. But it's a fascinating and I think very important question that you ask.
Thank you.
Sure, Beth.
Are there any other questions? Otherwise, we'll wrap everything up. All right. Well, Paul, thank you so much for this presentation and for sharing all of this with the BSA COTE community. And I think we're all better for having seen and being inspired by your work. For closing notes for the meeting, I will say I have been saying the date of the next meeting wrong this whole time. It's actually on Wednesday, June 16th. I put it in the chat, save the date. You'll also see it on the BSA calendar. And we look forward to seeing you all next month for the election. Until then, stay safe, enjoy getting outside as the world's starting to open back up, and we'll see you in a month. Thank you.
Well, thank you.